Are you experiencing brain fog and not feeling as sharp mentally as you used to be? Are you wondering if gluten could be contributing to that? It's possible. Today we're going to talk about the research behind that, what brain fog is, hidden sources of gluten, ways to test for gluten, and what you can do about gluten and brain fog. For the best advice to reclaim your health and vitality and rediscover the magic of feeling well, I'm Dr. Shelley Meyer. Tune into my channel every Thursday. Subscribe, hit the bell to be notified of when I post a new video. We talk about functional medicine topics and nutrition. So today, as I mentioned, we're talking about gluten and brain fog. Can they be connected? Yes, there's research to show us that they can be connected. If you're struggling with brain fog, it's a common thing that I see in lots of patients. I see hundreds of patients that have symptoms related to brain fog or food intolerances. So I get to see how they can be connected and how when you do make changes in the diet and in the lifestyle, in patients' diet and lifestyle, that your brain fog or their brain fog can be reduced. So I've helped hundreds of people get past brain fog. So let's talk more about what brain fog is. I also am going to have a link in my description down below that tells you about ways to look for hidden sources of gluten, so be sure to check that out. But let's start with what brain fog is. It's kind of a loose term. It doesn't mean the same thing in everyone, but it basically, when we use that term, we're trying to talk, or we're defining a group of symptoms that are where you're not thinking as sharply as you used to, your memory might not be as good as it used to be, you're not able to organize your thoughts as well as before. Sometimes you may feel just more easily overwhelmed mentally than you used to be, and it just feels just like there is a fog in your brain. And gluten, what we're talking about there, is anything in wheat, rye, oats, because they can be contaminated, or barley. So it encompasses a wide variety of foods, and we're going to talk about hidden sources of of gluten too. So what does the research say? Well, let me dig into it. So studies have shown that patients with celiac disease, which is the autoimmune version of gluten problems or gluten intolerance. So celiac disease is when your body actually makes antibodies against gluten, and you should not have gluten at all when you have celiac disease, because you will have various symptoms, and they can include brain fog. So there's GI discomfort, bloating, rashes, joint pain. Those can all be associated with gluten when you have celiac disease. So what do the studies say? There are studies that say that people with celiac disease, and that's where your body makes actual antibodies, it's an autoimmune disease where you make antibodies against gluten. So people with those antibodies and with celiac disease actually had improved cognitive scores on testing after they were changed over to a gluten-free diet. So that is one piece of evidence that shows us that cognitive function is affected by gluten in those with celiac disease. Now, there are people that are gluten sensitive or gluten intolerant that don't necessarily make all those antibodies or don't meet the full description, but they could make some of the antibodies, like trans tissue glutaminase. So there was a study done in bipolar patients that were at the level of hospitalization, and those patients that were at the most significant level of bipolar disease and were in the hospital, when they checked them for trans tissue glutaminase antibodies, all of their levels were elevated. So that shows us there could be some connection there between some altered brain function and mood disorders and celiac disease. Also, Dr. Alessio Fasano, who is the kind of guru of gluten. He's an MD that works he's the director of the Mass General Center for Celiac Disease. And he says 1/3 of his patients experience brain fog symptoms after eating gluten. So he has a large cohort of patients, and has found that 1/3 of them experience brain fog after eating gluten. There was also a 2018 large-scale study that showed of those with celiac disease and gluten sensitivity, so encompassed both, 70% had trouble concentrating after eating gluten, and 60 to 70% experienced grogginess, and 1/5 of them had these symptoms within 30 to 60 minutes of eating gluten. So you can see there have been studies that have linked them together, and then I hear case by case. I mean, it's anecdotal, but my patients telling me that they have brain fog after eating gluten, and these can be patients that are just gluten sensitive or gluten intolerant, not necessarily celiac. So you do want to try looking at this if you're experiencing brain fog and you can't get to the bottom of it. So what is gluten? Like I said, it's in wheat, rye, barley, and then oats are often contaminated unless they're verified gluten-free. So there can be also hidden sources of gluten, and I have to talk to patients a lot about this because they will say they're on a gluten-free diet, and you really kind of dig into the diet and you realize not really. So in soy sauce, in dressings, in different, like sometimes mayonnaise and different kind of condiments, you can get gluten, and it can be used in sometimes you have to watch out for modified food starch or some of the preservative type ingredients for gluten. So you do want to watch out. Now, a lot of the labels will say wheat on them at least, but they're not necessarily listing the actual preservatives, whether or not they have gluten in there. So that's why I made a comprehensive list of hidden sources of gluten, and I am going to link that in the description down below because it's a bit too much to list off here. I don't think it would be absorbed as well as actually reading it. So just watch out. If you're trying to work on brain fog and eliminate gluten, look for the hidden sources as well. You know, beer has gluten in there, and most people know that, but some people don't think of it when they sit down to have a beer that there's barley in there. So gluten can be linked to brain fog. Now, how can you determine if you have a gluten intolerance? Well, one way would be to take it out of your diet in all forms for 21 days and see if you feel better. Because the gold standard for gluten for celiac disease is to have a certain amount of antibodies, trans tissue glutaminase elevated, and the IgG elevated in your blood. Now, that's kind of the pre-step to the gold standard. The gold standard is actually an intestinal biopsy. How many people are going to go to that far for a surgery and a procedure to have an intestinal biopsy? Not many. So then the medical community accepts the antibody testing as, if you meet a certain criteria, as evidence of gluten or celiac disease. Now, in my functional medicine practice, we go a step beyond that if somebody's having symptoms and they think they're related to gluten, and we have them do both the regular panel of the antibodies, but then also there's a Cyrex panel, which is functional medicine lab, and they test multiple different cross-reactivities with different kinds of antibodies that could relate to gluten sensitivity and gluten intolerance. So we can take it a step further and see if you are gluten sensitive rather than meeting all the criteria for being celiac, because really the treatment's going to be the same. You're going to stop eating gluten. So check out our functional medicine practice if you'd like to work with us. There's links in the description down below. In Colorado, we can work with you in person or virtually. And I am starting to expand my medical license to work more virtually in more states. So keep that in mind. And then we have lots of blogs and posts on our Facebook. So all of my social media and my website is linked down below. So now that you know the connection between gluten and brain fog, check out some of my other videos that talk about reestablishing your microbiome. I had a video last week also on foods that can improve mood, and that can help when you're having brain fog. I also had a video on 10 tips to banish brain fog and fatigue. So there's some simple lifestyle changes and hacks you can do to boost your memory and your brain function. And next week, we're going to talk about how tea can boost memory and focus. So stay tuned to the channel, subscribe, share, hit the bell to be notified when I post every Thursday. And don't forget there's a PDF down below you can check out for hidden sources of gluten. Also, I have a link in my description for 10% off doctor-formulated supplements on my full script dispensary. So you can check that out if you want to look at some of the ways to help boost memory and focus as well, some of the supplemental ways we can do that. So I'm Dr. Shelley Meyer. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you next Thursday.